Добрый день. Спасибо за представление, спасибо за возможность выступить на этой конференции. Я на самом деле буду говорить о мировом рынке и расскажу, насколько позволит время, о азотном сегменте газохимии, то есть продуктах, которые начинаются с синтеза аммиака.
Products which start with synthesis of ammonia and further processing. This is a simplified arrangement of such products. Of course, it lacks many intermediate products, and of course, it is simplified to reflect on the scope of application of such products, such as all kinds of fertilizers and all kinds of industrial products. But I guess this audience doesn't need the details of all that. You're quite knowledgeable. So I would just briefly describe the difference of our industry, what is conductive for its developments and what is impeding those, what structural changes are taking place, and what are the challenges and developments we can expect going forward. To start with, regarding gas and gas industry, our industry is quite small. In the global balances of natural gas, it accounts for just 4% of gas, which is processed into ammonia, a small bit into methanol, and another little bit for making hydrogen in chemistry and petrochemistry. But for the most part, natural gas is consumed as fuel in the generation segment, in the utilities companies, and gas is consumed as fuel in various other industries of the global economy. For us, that means that the situation in both the ammonia and its derivatives market depends greatly, not just and solely on the supply and demand situations for those products, but also upon the impact of external factors and all kinds of adjacent and connected markets in the upstream segment. And it looks like if we are living in a room with a large hippopotamus, at any point of time the hippopotamus might turn around and crush our hand or our foot, and we can do nothing about that because no one cares about us living with a hippopotamus. That is just to illustrate the situation we had in 2011, 12, 13, and up to 14, when the gas prices under contracts were following the prices for crude and products and were quite high, and therefore gas, not just from Russia, but also Norwegian, Algerian, and LNG was offered at 400 and more dollars per 1,000 cubic meters. Ammonia was also very high priced. Out of the 1,000 cubic meters of gas, about 1 ton of ammonia is produced, and other configurations give certainly different yields. And provided such price scissors, the industry was just put to halt, and many production plants of ammonia making and nitrogen-based fertilizers making were shutting down, and the farmers had to cope with that, and they had to resort to imported products from Russia, of course, from China, from Egypt, from Qatar, and other exporting nations. And the prices in the industry were disturbed, but we didn't notice the casualty with respect to such closures because the volumes were made up by other producers. And when we had a meeting back then with the gas industry guys, we indicated that this price policy basically is killing an entire branch of the global industry, which is a good consumer of gas, Russian gas. And in reply, they told us that we will drive up the price in such a way so that you won't do your silly thing of processing gas into some silly stuff and exporting it as fertilizers. Also in 16 and 17, the prices for gas were slumping, and in Europe, following the collapse of prices for crude as well. And we in this industry have market mechanism when there is supply overhang of ammonia, usually higher cost producers which are using contract gas have to limit their supply, and so the balances stabilize and the market stabilizes. But in 16 and 17 they all continue to operate because the gas was so cheap that it was beneficial for them not just to produce ammonia but export it as well. Turkey, UK, Poland were all exporting, and until the Russian exporters in Trinidad is also cut production, they continue to export. So the market reversed. Everyone was hoping that it will flow in here, but we ran into problems again. In Russia, too, the situation is similar to that. Globally, for the most part, gas is consumed domestically as fuel, and only a small bit is used for the chemical feedstock. Otherwise, it is exported. From the point of view of gas industry, we're a small consumer, and I had experience of participating at meetings where gas distribution companies would invite us to discuss issues of gasification of the regions, and they needed anchor consumers who would take large volumes of gas, and we were offered good prices, discounts, if we were to build a plant and consume gas to where they wanted to put their pipeline to. And at that meeting, the first question was how much gas we are ready to consume. And we said that if we build 1 million tons of ammonia plant and another million of urea, then perhaps we would need 1 billion cubic meters, perhaps a bit more. And then their faces changed, and they were very much disappointed. They were looking forward to a large client, but for them, we are just small consumers, and so this was the end of the discussion. And we do know that in many regions of Russia where we have unique opportunities for exports and where very lucrative export production facilities could be built for ammonia and urea, the projects are no-go because they have an alternative of just exporting natural gas. There are liquefaction terminals, and no one is going to share this gas, especially at low prices for petrochemical companies. All in all, this is the structure of ammonia production in 2018 by types of feedstock. More than 70% accounts for gas. The rest is primarily making ammonia in China from coal. And should we have looked at the breakdown of capacities, then the share of coal would have been even greater, because back then capacity used in China was 55–60%. So in reality, the share of coal is more than 1/3, but still gas, natural gas, is the most economical and reasonable type of feedstock for synthesis of ammonia. And yet, why we need gas? We can make hydrogen from that, and then we can use nitrogen from the air to make ammonia. There are technologies of deriving hydrogen from water, and there are some commercialized units are already available in the market with relevant technologies. Here in the audience are people who are much more knowledgeable in those processes, and they would correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a trend with decarbonization and production of the so-called green ammonia that is bypassing the production of CO2 as a byproduct. It is available, and in late last year, the forecast of the European Association of Fertilizers was issued, and they forecast that by 2030, 10% of ammonia production in Europe would be through electrolysis, and 10% is 2 million tons. That means that that segment would have been there in that breakdown, and 100% could be covered through electrolysis by 2050. So the idea of that is to transit to green energy, solar, hydro, wind, and other renewables, and we need to deal with peak shavings issue, so there is always a problem of storage of energy. So in between the peak shavings, our electricity is basically not just coming free of charge, but why not store it in the form of hydrogen? And hydrogen is even a more challenging product for storage than ammonia. We can basically make ammonia out of it, but then we can burn it and derive energy with some losses. But if we don't require it in any case, why not do that? And so within Europe, if there is to be full decarbonization of Europe's energy sector by 2050, so tens or dozens or hundreds of millions tons of ammonia will be produced, and for fertilizers we can basically take a part of it. So this is the bright future, which is far, or perhaps not even far away. That's the breakdown by products for the most part. Those are all kinds of fertilizers. Regarding prospects of demand, fertilizers are stable in terms of going through crisis. Population is on the rise. More food is needed to feed the world's population. There are entire nations which would subsidize farmers and subsidize fertilizers for them, like they do in India, Indonesia, and Southeast Asian nations, where the territory for agriculture is expanding just as they do in Brazil. They are increasing their share of arable lands, and therefore it drives up the demand for fertilizers. And there are also potential growth zones, such as Africa, where they are still looking forward to the so-called green revolution, and enhanced consumption of fertilizers would have driven up tremendously the harvest figures and the yields, and therefore the production of various types of food. So if we are successful in driving up consumption of fertilizers in Africa, that would have been very beneficial for the continent and for the entire world. In Russia, consumption of fertilizers used to grow by 10 to 15% per year, and now it has almost come to a halt, but there are structural changes occurring, and there is the trend for more efficient and versatile types of fertilizers in Russian agriculture. In terms of commodity ammonia, that is primarily the market which has to do with industrial consumption and making fertilizers which, as opposed to urea, do not require to be placed at the same site where ammonia is made, because ammonia could be brought from external sources. So the cost of ammonia production depends on the price of the feedstock largely, and to a great degree there is capacities overhang versus existing level of demand, because China, after changing their policies, have been using their capacities at low levels. So the marginal producer will be somewhere in the region of Southeast Asia and East Europe. But we have been seeing within the course of several few years quite extensive growth of capacities, which had to do with the problem of monetization of gas. It is important for Russia as well, because almost everywhere in every producing region, including Taimyr, Yakutia, Chukotka, and other remote areas, there are projects for building mineral fertilizers plants, which will be consuming the gas available locally and supplying to the agricultural areas next door. The same goes for West Africa, North Africa, Middle East, Indonesia. shale gas regions in the States, and Russia essentially did participate in that increase of capacity that had to do not with the increasing demand, but rather with issues of gas monetization, that is, turning gas into something sellable. And the same goes, for instance, for methanol markets, which I guess will be the story for tomorrow. I am now in the company which welcomed once a top manager from a large bank, and when we were giving him the story about the industry, when he heard the word methanol, he got suddenly very lively. Many people are coming with projects in methanol. It must be a great thing, so tell me more about that. So there are quite a few such projects which are only partially reflective on the prospects of demand. There are quite a few plants of commodity ammonia, and those integrated in the downstream are either being built or already commissioned, including capacities in Russia, in the Baltic coast, and the capacities in Russia count for more than 3 million tons. That is additions in the Baltic area. There is a settled structure of flows in the global ammonia trade market, but what is interesting, it is going through changes now because of new capacities coming on stream. There is considerable decline of imports to the States, and the role of the U.S. As an exporter of ammonia is growing. In 2017, they did close to 700,000 tons, and it could have been more, even more than that in 2018, should it not be for trade wars with China, where they used to export their ammonia. Next question is, what would happen with such a large supplier as Trinidad, which would traditionally supply their stuff to Latin America and the States? But since the situation in those markets is changing, they need to get diversified and move to other market outlets. And in recent years, there is an overall trend of decline in exports and the growth of supply to other regions, not just the Americas. Fortunately, there are increasing import markets, including China, which build up on their imports considerably. And only infrastructural limitations stop the Chinese from exporting even more and even faster. There is Morocco, which is building up their phosphate production capacities, therefore they need more ammonia for making fertilizers. Another question is why they need that much phosphates, but this is not for us to discuss. And by the way, Morocco is also the nation, the kingdom, which is looking into new ammonia making technologies, since they have perhaps largest in the world solar power projects out there in the deserts. They have projects with European technology providers which are considering making ammonia via electrolysis. And if this happens, they will not be importing anymore. A largest market of ammonia derivatives is first and foremost urea. Urea is a core fertilizer, and the growth in the urea segment is primarily dictated by the expansion of the relevant industries, including the industries which are making urea-containing compounds for scrubbing exhaust gases from diesels. I'm speeding up a bit. What we see is China is shrinking their exports of urea. It could have been less than 1 million last year, and if it hadn't been for sanctions on Iran, so Iran was not in position to supply urea to India. So in the couple of months close to end of last year, the Chinese were coming out with large volumes. Imports to the States are declining due to obvious reasons. For us, for our company, which is a largest globally producer of ammonium nitrates for fertilizers, this segment is very important. And Russian exports account for about 40% of the global trade in this product. And basically, we see this stagnating. Also, in recent years, quite a number of factors led to changes in the premiality of this market. In this chart, you can see the premium per 1 unit of nitrogen and nitrogen ammonia versus to urea. Basically, it went down to zero. If you ask me why afterwards, I will tell you why. In the phosphates market, there is quite a high consumption of ammonia. Low-cost producers went up in their share from 12 to 31%, and basically old producers are being ousted from the market. And finally, what shapes the nitrogen segment in future? We have mentioned prevailing trends such as the green market and decarbonization. And there is also efficiency of fertilizer use in place, specialty fertilizers, inhibitors containing fertilizers which decrease losses of nitrogen. There is a certain specific policy with respect to fertilizers in China. There is increasing demand for urea and ammonia solutions for scrubbing technology. And the last bit is IT revolution in agriculture, which will be even more manifested going forward. Basically, it is about collecting information from all the market players, farmers, distributors, and producers, and basically analyzing this information to get a more precise knowledge as to how many nutrients and where are required. And most likely there will be kind of revolution in the area of distribution of fertilizers. We will need some kind of Amazons suppliers which would put together small batches of specially mixed fertilizers with the target nutrients for a certain area of application, as opposed to the bulk supplies now. So I started to fit within the time limit I had. I failed, but still thank you for your attention.